Thank you all for joining. I am particularly excited about the session today with Terrence to join us from the ReliabilityWeb organization. So just as a bit of introduction before I let you introduce yourself, last year we've been working with many of you in the asset performance world, and especially with the predictive maintenance initiatives with C3I Reliability. And last year, one of our customers, Sanofi, called up me and Ed Abo to say, hey, I'm part of this organization. It's called ReliabilityWeb, and they are the leaders in reliability. They bring together experts and practitioners across industries, everything from pharma with Sanofi to oil and gas with our customers from FHR, to the water and utilities and some of the organizations we work with in the state and local business. So wide different varieties of industries, and they host these events. They have a leadership institute, and they're really helping the reliability teams advance their practice. So it's not just responding to issues and bringing corrective action, or even time-based maintenance strategies. And so Sanofi said, I think it would be an awesome fit if C3 started to work with ReliabilityWeb organization. And Ed and I went and spoke at the International Maintenance Conference in Marco Island, so not that far of a flight from here, probably a couple hours, maybe 2 hours or something from here, back in December. And got introduced to this group, and it's been a really wonderful partnership so far. We'll be back at the Reliability Conference, TRC, in April in Seattle, which we're really excited about. Do some hands-on work like we did yesterday in the asset performance breakout session. And I thought it would be an awesome opportunity to share what are the best practices in reliability, and how is the reliability industry and thought leaders like Terrence thinking about how AI can be applied in this space. So that's really the inspiration behind this session, and thank you for joining. So with that, maybe, Terrence, could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about ReliabilityWeb organization?
Sure will. Thank you very much for having me. It's been a really awesome conference. I've learned a lot here, a lot of insights going on. The keynote stage has been particularly fantastic. I'm Terrence O'Hanlon. I'm the CEO at ReliabilityWeb. In the 26th year, it is like Lila says, it's a hub, it's a community. We have suppliers on one side, we have practitioners on another side, some few mixed in the middle, and we talk about how we can advance reliability and asset management. And that all starts with language. Basically, we work with a framework that we call Uptime Elements. I'm going to show it to you in a minute. But I wanted to start by making some comments about what I've seen so far. One thing that stunned me was the gentleman from Siemens. I think his last name is Snabe. Really great presentation that floored me. For every dollar you spend on ERP, you better be ready to spend $10 on the supporting services. Stunning. Really, and we've all struggled with ERP and EAM over the last 20 years, and I believe that to be so, but now watching this AI layer that C3 sort of lays on top of those applications, does it feel the same to you? It finally feels like the software works like we want it to. That's what it's looking like, and that's what it's sounding like, and that's what it's feeling like. So I just really want to say thank you for that. The other one, and I think there's some people from Dow in the room, was really great to hear what you're doing. But at the same time, I want to ask a question, which is, Dow's excellent operating company, some of the best reliability engineers in the planet. Best operating processes and procedures in the planet. Company that knows what it's doing and knows how to do it well. There's not even a question. Yet they could find these enormous opportunities with their furnaces by using the software with the data. And so what does that really suggest? What's the software bringing to the party that was missing before? And is it cross-functionality? Is it data, and we can take the emotion out of the conversation? Is it collaboration across the organization? So I just found that's a question that I don't have an answer to, that I'm sort of leaning into now, because I want to know if we can make that kind of a difference with a company that was already operating pretty good, darn good. What can we do with this, especially with some of the companies that may not be operating at that high a level? And then Qatar Energy, that blew me away. They're going to pick applications that replace 100 FTEs. That's where they're starting. In other words, in their selection list, they're going to start with applications that can represent the work of 100 FTEs. That's mind-blowing. That's really mind-blowing stuff. And I got a chance to be in Lisa's presentation yesterday. Really fantastic, hands-on. We're very much looking forward to doing something like that at the Reliability Conference and getting our people more comfortable with this idea. I like the gentleman from Montana that was up on the stage, likening it to the Terminator and things of that nature. And I think there is a lot of that. We work with another company called Boston Dynamics, and they make a robot dog, if you've seen that. And the first, people either love it or they think it's the creepiest thing that they've ever seen, kind of a deal. And we need to embrace the technology for sure. We focus on language. I'm just going to say that. This is the framework that we use. It might seem a little resemblance of Mendelow's table of elements. We call it uptime elements. And what we found over the years, we've got probably the deepest body of research on contiguous, we call it longitudinally connected practice study. So best practices PM, best practices for condition monitoring, best practices for CMMS. And we visit them about every 5 years and watch the industry move. And most of what's on here has been around for 30 or 40 years. We didn't invent root cause analysis. We didn't invent ultrasonic testing. What we did was we invented the system of putting it all together. And what we found is that generally in the world of assets, people work in specific domains. So they might work in the orange, the reliability engineering domain. And in that domain, again, another takeaway from Dow, I believe that was the CIO that was up on stage, stated that these furnaces are the most critical asset on the site. Would it surprise you if I told you I was at a mining site and we did criticality analysis? We found out that the most critical asset was outside the gate. It was a fuel station that was about a mile outside of the mine. And if that fuel pump in the gas station, the fueling station went down, no trucks were going to be filled with fuel, and they wouldn't be doing any mining at that point in time. So sometimes it's the big, gnarly asset in the middle of everything that makes everything happen. Other times it's not. So how do we determine, so what Orange's job is to do, and you notice I shift to Orange instead of reliability engineering, because when we're talking to CIOs, when we're talking to CEOs, as soon as you start talking mean time between failure and mean time to repair, their eyes glaze over. They're like, oh yeah, I have an engineering department for that over here, kind of a thing. So we like to convert it to colors and hear the CIO say, yeah, we need a little more orange around here is what we need. We know we're on a track if we're doing something like that. But what assets are the most critical assets to what you're doing? In other words, if that asset fails, it's going to really hurt somebody, it's going to cause an environmental incident, or you're going to shut down your business. Are you clear about what assets, those are? And a lot of companies are not. It's a very emotional topic because often it's the asset that's closest to what I work with. But then if you ask the person over here, it's the asset closest to the one they work with. And unless you've done engineering on it, you might be a little blind to what are the most critical assets and what are the consequences of those assets. That's the role of Orange. And the reason why we need to know that is severalfold. When we're going to apply technology, we want to apply it to the most critical assets. But the other thing is we're all constrained. Anybody in the room have unlimited time, unlimited budget? No, we're constrained. We have to pick what we're going to do. So criticality helps us do that. The second part is how are those assets going to fail? We know that in advance. We can know that, root cause analysis kind of looking through the rear view mirror to see what happened and how to make it not happen again. But reliability is looking through the front windshield. What could happen? What are the failure modes? And what are the failure mechanisms, and what are the failure causes? By the way, those are distinctions. And I just want to say, sometimes I don't hear those distinctions when I'm in asset-intensive sites. A failure mode is the car won't start, right? A failure mechanism is the car won't start because the battery's dead. And then a failure cause is the car won't start because the battery's dead because nobody put water in to the battery when they were supposed to. So, we need to have distinctions when we talk about failure. In fact, If I was a little more true, I would tell you my company name should be FailureWeb, because the opposite, the other side of the hand to reliability is failure. And we have to embrace failure. We have to understand failure. We have to really study failure and have a language around it. And that's what we found as we introduced this, that there was a lack of a consistent language. We were in the session yesterday, and I noticed you were very kind. You started off and you told us about a definition for an asset. But there is a global definition for an asset. And yours is good. No, they don't have any issue with how you define an asset. But there is a global standard for a definition for what an asset is. And is it advantageous if we all in this room spoke the exact same language as to what's an asset, something that has actual or potential value to the corporation or to the organization, is the definition of an asset. And what's asset management is the coordinated set of activities that realizes that value. It's a coordinating layer. It's a managing layer. And we often find that sort of where you're putting systems like C3 or SAP or Maximo, that's one part of that asset management system. But your decision making is another part of it. And the systems that you use and the policies that you use. All of your organizations are policy driven. You have a policy, right, on how to take a vacation day at your company, because if you didn't, HR would be going crazy. You have a policy of how to draw on your, contribute to your 401k, that type of thing. Oops, we forgot a policy for our assets. How many in this room, and I'm not looking to embarrass anybody, but if you're willing to say so, great. How many in this room have a formalized asset management policy? Your organizations are policy driven. Right? And a policy is just simply a way that you say to everybody in the organization, this is where we stand in terms of asset management. This is our belief. It's a one-page document, usually policy, 1 page, 2 pages, not too extensive. And this is how we stand for asset management. This is how we stand for reliability. This is what we believe. It's great because your organization is policy driven. And eventually, as soon as you make an asset management policy, nothing changes the next day. But slowly over time, people will come to that policy. They'll use it for clarity. They'll use it for direction. They'll use it for guidance. What comes underneath that asset management policy is a strategic asset management plan. What are you going to be doing over the next 5 years? In Western society, we don't find a lot of companies that have a clear 5-year path for what they're going to do with their assets and how they're going to align the value that the assets can generate with what the organization wants to generate. So the organization has an aim, and the organization usually has assets. Oftentimes, those are disconnected. When you talk to maintainers, they've got one idea about what should happen with the asset. Reliability people have a different idea, and asset managers have a different idea. How do we get operators have a different idea? Purchasing has a different idea. Engineering has a different idea. How do we get them all together so that we're all heading towards value? What's value? It's defined by the organization. They've told us what value is. They have an aim, they have a mission, they have a vision, they have objectives, and we have to aim the outcome of those assets towards the organization's objectives. So we use reliability. This is in no particular sequence, by the way. We've had this sequenced a million different ways. This is installed in about 6,000 different locations around the world. It's supported by 4,000 what we call certified reliability leaders that have studied it. And like I said, reliability sometimes is relegated to the maintenance department. Sometimes maintenance engineering, sometimes maintenance operations engineering. That's great if you can get three stakeholder groups involved in it. But who's responsible for safety in your organizations? Who's responsible for safety? Which department? There we go. Thank you. And almost when you answer that, you're almost incredulous, right? Everyone. What is he thinking? Why is he asking us that? That everyone's responsible for safety. Now that's sort of natural. I can tell you 30 years ago when I used to go into plants, that was not so much the case. It wasn't everybody. It was at some point in USA, Canada, we put a flag in the ground and we said, we're not going to accept the previous level of safety, and we're going to make a new kind of standard in what we're going to accept for safety. And then we made a cultural march towards organizations now it's clear that everyone in the organization is responsible for safety. Now, sometimes there's some technical things that technical people have to take care of related to safety, but other times there's people-related things. So safety is a team sport. We think reliability is also a team sport, right? Is that you can't maintain your way to reliability. Everyone's trying to do that. You want to know why? I'll give you a secret as to why you can't maintain your way to reliability. Maintainers are not responsible for downtime. Did your maintainers break the asset? Your maintainers break a lot of assets? I don't think so. Maybe 10%, maybe 20% of the downtime you could attribute to maintenance workmanship. Some you could attribute to maintenance spare parts and the way you store it. But anybody have any experience with operators causing downtime? I love the laughs. I love the laughs when we ask that question. Purchasing causing downtime, design, install. Those are all, so reliability is like safety. We need to make it a team sport, right? It's cross-functional. Maintenance doesn't have the sphere of influence to stop those causes of downtime. They can stop some of the causes of downtime. So when, I heard the case study from Dow, I started thinking to myself, wow, I'm wondering if AI has a role to play in cross-functionality inside companies, because there's a lot of pockets of, we specialize in these silos because it makes sense. Maintainers are really good at maintaining. Engineers are really great at engineering. Operators are really great at operating. HR is really good at people. Finance good at finance. Purchasing good at finance. We need those silos of excellence. So Maura calls them cylinders of excellence, that we usually call silos. But then how do we work together? And I'm wondering if AI is going to break down a lot of those barriers that we have inside companies, because data talks, right? It takes all the sting of the emotion out of it when you can just show everybody the facts. Because everybody in the company generally wants the company to do well. Everybody wants the company to really excel. So we start with criticality because we're constrained. We want to understand failure modes and what we can do to counter those failure modes. That's what Orange is about. Those are with existing assets. Best if you can do it, if you look at the bottom, that's asset life cycle, and the first 5 stages are before handover, before commissioning. That's where reliability's made. That's where you make reliability, right? The decisions you make as you specify, as you design, as you procure, as you build, and as you commission, you have a lot of influence on the reliability. You have a lot of influence on maintenance cost and total cost of ownership of that asset. In fact, by the time you hand over the keys, 80% of the life cycle cost of that asset is locked. You will do nothing about 80% of it. Now, you can mess around with 20% of it and optimize 20%, but the day you hand over the keys, 80% of that life cycle cost is set. So we look at maintenance as a cost, as most financial people would, because it shows up as cost on our profit and loss statement, right? I've never seen a profit and loss statement where it showed up as income. It almost always shows up as cost. And so we have a natural instinct to want to minimize that, or at least optimize it. Reliability, we consider that to be an investment. That's directly connected to revenue. And that was what's so exciting about the case studies that we're seeing here. Everyone's really focusing in on what's the revenue, where do we get the money? And that makes a lot of sense. Technology is expensive, but it's really valuable if we can unlock value. So, this is kind of about condition monitoring. So when we talk about predictive maintenance, we call it asset condition management. And let me tell you why we don't call it predictive maintenance. Nothing wrong with the term, very well used all around the world. But imagine now I just turned 66, right? And I go to my doctor, and doctor says, Terrence, we've done statistical studies across the United States. And the average male human heart goes to about 66. So time to open you up and put a new heart in. Wait a second. Do you have any trend data on me? Have you taken my blood test? Have you taken my blood pressure? Have you done an EKG? Have you done X-ray? Have you done all the tests? And it would be more comfortable for me if I was getting that news from a doctor who had seen me every 6 months and had trend data on me. Now, you want a doctor who's going to partner with you to operate on a time basis to replace your heart, or do you want a doctor who's going to partner with you to manage your asset health? They're going to manage your asset health. They're going to say, Terry, you got to be moving 2, 3, 4 miles a day. You need to be eating better, cut out the fried foods, no more French fries every day for you. You need to eat more fruit, eat more, protein, eat whatever it is that we need to do to extend our lives. And change, by the way, is really hard. I did a change management class at Harvard, and they brought the heart surgeon out. And he said, when they do the 4-valve replacement, they give you a little checklist of those kind of activities. Walk and drink more water and eat less fried foods and stuff that's not, maybe not in our daily habits, but nothing too difficult to accomplish. And he said for the first 90 days, everybody checks the boxes like a Boy Scout. I did it, I did it, I did it, I did it, I did it. On 91 days, that statistic drops to 1 in 9. Now that's when you're extending your life 5 to 10 years. So imagine trying to change the reliability or maintenance practices at a company. Change is hard, and I've really appreciated the fact that almost every presenter here has talked about formalizing a change management process along with the technology implementation to get the people to adopt it, to get the people to understand it, be comfortable with it, and reliability is the exact same thing. So we want to manage the condition of the asset and detect nothing. Wouldn't it be great if we detected nothing? Do you want the TSA agent to detect a lot of things? Yeah, you want the TSA agent to detect nothing if possible. And the other thing, sort of a little bit of a stuck in my craw, is that with predictive maintenance and condition monitoring, all right, great, you detected the bearing that is now going to fail earlier than its L10 life was supposed to be. Well, you didn't align the pump and the motor when you put it on. You didn't align it, you didn't balance it. Because there was no time, they told the maintenance technician, get that thing installed, you can come back over the weekend and get it aligned. Well, of course, nobody ever goes back and does the precision work to do that. They don't align it, they don't balance it, they put it in. So in other words, we're sort of self-inducing some of these failures, where if we had precision practices and we did proper installation, why wouldn't you ask yourself, why would my bearing not make it to the end of design life? But we accept bearing failures as like just an everyday part of life. Well, someone put dirty lubrication in there. Why was that? How come we can't fix the lubrication? So we want to focus you on something a little different than prediction. Prediction is super important. We need it. We want to be covered, especially on those assets that are critical. We want that coverage. I'm wearing an Apple Watch. I believe in prediction. Right? We want to have the data, we want to be able to predict, but we also want those predictions not only to save us from the downtime that could come, but we want to change our practices so that we can start doing more precision and not have to predict so many of those things. Now, that's a perfect world. We will always have entropy, and the second law of thermodynamics will be with us forever, and we will always have that kind of degradation that we're going to have to deal with. But make it a goal to have 0 breakdowns due to early bearing failure, kind of a thing. So with that, the reason why we need those sensors and all that data is because the reality of failure is that 80% of the failures in your assets are random. They're not going to occur on a time-directed basis or even a cycle-directed basis. So if you're doing a lot of maintenance on a time-directed or a cycle-directed, you're probably sending the wrong army against the wrong enemy. Now, you could make a justification that there's maybe 20% of your assets that you know enough about their failure pattern to be able to do time-directed maintenance and have that be something that's effective and value-added. But the other 80% are random, and that's why we need, because different 66-year-olds have different conditions in their heart, and we need to be able to monitor that to be able to say that, what is the condition of the asset. So we use sensors like vibration, fluid analysis, ultrasound, infrared, electrical signature analysis, and things of that nature. But we're trying to drive management of the condition of the asset rather than simply prediction. It goes beyond prediction. Prediction is critical, it's important, but it's not the end of the road. It's not the goal is not prediction. The goal is prediction to drive us to more precision practices, if that makes sense. I'm not letting you get a word in edgewise
No,
here.
I'm loving this. This is great. We're getting a whole lecture. I did want to maybe chime in and ask a question, which is, in C3AI, many of you are using the reliability application. We predict what's going to fail. We recommend failure modes. We recommend the prescriptive action. We identify the spare parts. We tell you what spare parts you have in inventory along with a long-range supply forecast. But that is really going after a problem that is going to happen in the next, 2 to 12 weeks, something like that, some degradation curve. But what you talked about is actually working across the organization. There's problems with procurement. There's problems with the installation and like getting a new asset installed, commissioning. So when you think about what you've seen in the past few days and also the organizations that you work with who have transformed the reliability practice and really driven value, what are some of the key learnings and takeaways as this relates to reliability being an organization-wide practice, and how do you think AI can actually help that cross-functional work?
Because AI never forgets anything. AI remembers everything. And what you've got is you've got some people in your organization that are interested in the next few minutes, the next few hours, and today. And they're very important, and their concerns are very important, and we have to take care of them. They're the front line. Then you've got other stakeholders in maintenance, reliability, and asset management that are interested in this week or this month, the planners, the schedulers, the supervisors, things of that nature. Then you've got other people that are interested in this year. And then you've got other people that are interested in the next 25 years or the next 50 years, right? Now, how do we align them? And that's the kind of the bell that went off for me listening to the Dow presentation, is that, look at the CIO and the front line have something in common here. They've got a common cause and a common concern. Their daily pressures are different. And so how do we feed the CIO and feed the front line at the same time? Excellence. And I think that when it's left to the human, we're sort of short-term oriented. We want to get through the day, we want to get through the week kind of a deal, where Buckminster Fuller said there's nothing in a caterpillar that indicates it's going to be a butterfly. And when I heard that, I said, that's the best reliability quote I've ever heard in my whole life. Because the stuff you do in reliability today, nothing happens. I mean, you do a good failure mode analysis, nothing happens. What's going to happen is the beautiful management and all the decisions you're going to make for the next 20 years about that asset, because you took that couple days and did a detailed failure modes analysis on that particular context of that operating asset. So I think some of it's, in answer to your question, some of it's the time disconnect, and how do we push that all together? Because it's the decisions you're making early in the asset life that are going to really determine the reliability. Once they hand those keys over, when you get a car off the lot, brand new car, the first thing you think about is, let me take that home and start improving the reliability on that car. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go improve the reliability on that car. The reliability is inherent in the car. The reliability is inherent in the asset by the time it gets to commission. The reliability is inherent. You could call it inherent reliability, you can call it operational reliability. Sometimes they use that term. I don't like operational, I like inherent, because it's clear to me. We built the reliability in to the product or to the asset. So it's that time disconnect, and the different silos of excellence have different priorities. Well, you said it sort of in your question. Purchasing might get rewarded for finding a new bearing supplier or a new gasket. So we've seen it with gasket suppliers. And they got bonuses for saving money on these gaskets, but the maintenance department had oil leaks every 6 months that they had to deal with. And they spiked the cost of the maintenance budget. Now the purchasing, so it's different rewards and different measurements across the organization that I think AI can do a great job in connecting us, saying, hey, there's a cause here and there's an effect here, and they're disconnected in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unifying all those different pieces of information and then reasoning on top of all of that information where, the incentives might be different across groups, but if you can actually tie the root cause over time and history of all the different people and processes that have touched an asset, it could actually drive organizational alignment through the data itself.
Right, exactly. And so how do we serve the person who's concerned with that bearing that's failing this week or this month, and the person who's responsible for that asset for the next 25 years? And how do we align them together?
Yeah. Another question for you, I asked this to Marianne during the panel on engineering and manufacturing today, and I think it's a conversation we have with pretty much all of our reliability customers, which is you're trying to evaluate the value of counterfactuals, and you just mentioned this. You know, when things are going well, there's no event, there's no cost. And so you can't point to something. It's like the epitome of a thankless job, right? When you do it well, there's nothing to celebrate, but you're also not getting fired. So how do you see organizations that do this well celebrate the success of high reliability and also measure new initiatives that go to tackle increased asset run life and increased reliability and availability?
Yeah, well, so a couple things. Some words really set me off. So improving reliability after commissioning, that's a word that sets me off. We're going to go improve reliability around here. All right, I'll accept that terminology if you degraded it. If you've degraded reliability, sure, you can improve it. If you degraded the inherent reliability that was in the asset, sure, you can definitely improve it from that. But you can never get it much better than the inherent reliability that was delivered in that. And as Lila said, we're in a society that no one is going to chase you down in the parking lot and say, wow, today was really a great day, nothing happened. Thank you for the most boring day we've ever had at the plant. I just really want to thank you for that. Unfortunately, we just don't do that here. And so, but we have seen companies starting to try to embrace that. It's just difficult because of all the time disconnect. The decisions and the actions that caused that boring day probably happened a while back. And how do we connect the dots to having a boring day? So we do talk about it a lot in our leadership. Those companies sort of are aware of it, and they try to brief their executives on that sort of thinking, but it is extremely difficult to accomplish an acknowledgement for something that didn't happen.
I can keep going, we'll keep talking. This is really interesting, but any questions from the group here that, feel free to raise your hand and we can have an open dialogue. Okay. So I guess, how long have you been in this space?
Oh, well, I was 20 years. I built a sensor company. I was in ultrasonic detection. And I'm a perfect example, because if you asked me what the answer to any problem was, it was ultrasonic detection, of course. I was the CEO of the company, and I went all around the world crawling on all kinds of assets, and there was nothing we couldn't solve with ultrasound. And then I discovered RCM about the time that, I guess it's dating me a little bit, when the first 747 was coming out. The way that they determine periodicity for airline maintenance is, they used to, the number of passenger miles flown. And, average airline back then, DC-8, DC-9, had like maybe 100 seats. So they multiply the number of passengers flown and blah, 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 and figure out when they needed to do a complete overhaul on the aircraft. Well, the CFO of United Airlines, who ordered the first 747, started doing the calculations at 340 seats and said, wait a second, to the FAA, you certainly aren't going to use the same math here, are you? We have a whole different context of an airline here. And the FAA said, we have there's no exception. This is how we calculate maintenance. And so they went and they pulled like 10 years worth of airline component and system failure data, and they patterned 6 failure patterns, and that's where they found that 80% of the failures are random. In other words, you could replace them on time all you want. You're not going to lower the failure rate. Should we? There's a projector. Is there a projector somewhere here? But there's should we replace that light bulb in that projector every 10,000 hours? Because the mean time between failure, the whole population of projector bulbs is 10,000 hours. Should we replace the bulb then? And of course not. Some burn out as soon as you pop it in. Some go 20,000 hours. So if it's something that the operators can notice, and then they can report, and it's not critical, then that's probably something you could do on a run-to-fail basis. Run-to-fail is a perfectly acceptable, proactive, engineered decision. It's not a good reactive decision, but it's a good proactive decision. So some things are okay to run to failure. Other things, if you have enough data, it's okay to do them on a timed basis. But we really need something in between that for the assets that don't fit and that are sort of more random.
Yeah, so it's a perfect lead up. So you come from kind of the technology side,
Yes.
but then also spend all of your time with the business and with the reliability and maintenance practitioners. So a trend that I have noticed with many of our customers is the emergence of an IT/OT team and org. So how does that new construct fit in with this mindset where reliability should be owned by everyone across the organization? And what is the role of the IT/OT team in trying to improve, I guess not improve reliability, but maintain from the initial commissioning?
Yeah, it's a big question. Us OT people have not always looked at our IT brothers and sisters as support. We've looked at it as sort of a barrier. We like to be unleashed and not locked down. And in OT, and IT likes control and locking down. And so how do we marry those together? I think the fact that cybersecurity is such a concern now, I don't think anybody questions the need for IT to really have top level sort of control. But it just goes back to having clear guidance, having clear policy, having clear strategy. Why is it that us people in OT look at IT as non-support? It's just misalignment is what it is, and miscommunication and misunderstanding of what the roles are. And I think once we're a leadership-centered framework, so we're leadership first. We haven't gotten to the red, but when the framework first came out, it ended in red because we thought leadership was going to crack it all open. And it was very profound. Our leadership context is work with integrity, not honesty. We call it integrity. We don't go down that slippery slope of what's truth and what's honesty. It's do what you say you're going to do, and when you don't, then clean it up at the earliest possible opportunity. It's simple. You said you were going to do it, or it's expected of you of your job. It's expected in your role. It's the law. Do all that stuff, and when you don't, clean it up at the earliest possible opportunity. Authenticity. Be who you say you are. We all don't need to share the same values, but if I understand your values, it's going to be a lot easier for me to see why you're making the decisions you're making and why you lead the way you lead. Responsibility. I'm a conference producer also. COVID was a very difficult time for conference producers. And I could have said, oh, well, COVID canceled my conference. And yes, COVID was the core cause, but we stood in control of that. I took responsibility for canceling the conference and brought it back as soon as I possibly could. So rather than standing in the victimization, there's power in taking responsibility. You can't help the cards you're dealt. You do everything about the response to the cards you're dealt. And that's what we're talking about with it. And then last is working at that aim that's bigger than oneself. So you all work for great companies. And those companies have amazing aims that support our society, that support civilization, that support health, that support prosperity. That's such a big aim. And I think you know that everybody who works for you wants the aim that your chairman wants, that the board has set out, the About Us page on your website. Every frontline worker that you've hired is into that. But sometimes they get disconnected from what that aim is. And we find it's very empowering to, there's a story about John F. Kennedy. He challenged us to go to the moon in 10 years. And he was down at the Space Center and he was walking through one of the tunnels and he saw a floor sweeper. And he said to the gentleman, "What is your job, sir?" And he put the broom down. He came and said, "Mr. President, my job is to put a man on the moon." I mean, he was so clear on the purpose that he was there for, and he was removing contamination and da-da-da. But I mean, that's empowerment, right? And so I guess that was a long-winded answer to IT/OT, is have everybody work with integrity and authenticity and responsibility, but also be very clear as to how they tie into the delivery of the aim of that business. Then it's much easier for them to collaborate, because they've got a common cause.
I love that about your organization, that hammering home this idea that in order to drive change, there's focus on the strategic part of the organization that they're operating in. So what are some of the best practices and guidance that you give to the members of your leadership group specifically on how to drive change, across their organization with some of these leadership principles in mind?
We tell them to look in the mirror and start with the person that's looking back. Everybody wants to change somebody else. It's harder to change yourself. But if you're showing that, you're in touch with yourself and how to change yourself to be a better leader, a more empowered leader, a more responsible leader, a leader who leads with integrity. We're not talking about CEO leadership. We think the front line, if you're working in a plant right now, if you've ever worked in maintenance, you know which supervisors are leaders. If you had an important job at the plant, you know which supervisor you'll be giving that job to because you know who the leaders are. They can lead from a supervisory level. They can lead from a frontline level. We've seen it many, many times. Once you work with integrity, authenticity, responsibility, and aim, you put your foot out, and the whole ship of that organization will go around your foot. You have a lot of power if you work like that. And that's how we encourage people to change.
Love it. Thank you. I'll open it back up again. Any questions? No? Okay. I guess from some of the presentations that we saw today or over the past 2 days, expanded much beyond reliability, talking about efficiency, sustainability goals, supply chain goals. Do you work with anyone in the Reliability Institute to expand the scope maybe of what can be achieved with some of these same elements?
Yes, I just finished some work with an MRO Supply Chain Matters group, and we created the 10 rights of asset lifecycle. We did the 10 rights of MRO supply chain, and we sort of made an analog to the asset lifecycle in MRO and supply chain. There's a lot of opportunity there. We say, well, a couple things. One, with the spare parts, you can pay for every reliability dream you ever had with how poorly, if you could optimize your spare parts management. I mean, it just pays for everything. There's not much you can spend $10 or $100 million on up here. CMMS, the technology, EAM, CMMS, you could spend $10, $100 million on, and MRO. But short of that, it's really hard to spend $100 million on any of those other things, mostly behavioral and execution oriented. So there's a lot of reasons to do it. I want you all to be excited about reliability, but if that's not your thing and you're excited about MRO or you're excited about supply chain or you're excited about operations, I want you to be excited about that too. I wish everybody was excited about reliability the way I am. But they're not. So yeah, we try to meet them where they are. It's very important to us that we meet whoever we're working with where they are. This is a framework with absolutely no requirements. So in other words, wherever anybody is, this framework is designed to meet them there and start with whatever foot they want to put forward after that.
We've heard the spare part need very loud and clear from a lot of the organizations we work with. I was just out visiting the U.S. Air Force 2 weeks ago, and we've been working with them for a long, long time, predicting failures on the aircraft at the component level, doing long-range supply forecasting, who's supplying which parts, when they're going to fail, how much are you going to have in inventory, but it still is not yet the full logistics optimization that you're talking about, and so that's the next phase of work that we're going to do together, because they're facing still massive downtime of the aircraft, not because they don't know what's going to fail and when and what parts they're going to need, but just because they don't have the spare parts on hand.
Well, or worse, we work with a company that makes a cancer drug where there's a patient for every drop of drug that they can make. There's 2 plants, one in Ireland, one in New Jersey. Plant in New Jersey goes down, and it can't make this because they're missing a spare part. They check with the OEM. It's a 6-week delivery. They check with Ireland. Ireland says they don't have it. About 2 weeks later, somebody's rumbling around in the parts room and said, "Hey, isn't this the part they're looking for in New Jersey?" And it was. They put somebody on an airplane, literally, and flew them to New Jersey to deliver it, but they had cataloged the part incorrectly. Listen, if we're maintainers and asset managers and operators, we don't know how to run an Ace Hardware store. I mean, we need help with that. So yeah, that's great that you're listening and putting that in, because a lot of smart people, but that is a very different business, and it's one that does require a lot of data, a lot of work.
Going back to where we started the conversation, how how to work across the organization to drive reliability. I think part of it too with technology is just one piece of the puzzle at a time. We can start with the core reliability group and focusing on the need of the reliability engineers and the maintainers. But then as we solve that problem, I think the adjacencies will continue to grow. So then tackle spare parts, and then maybe tackle the design of the equipment. Oh, what are the recurring failures by OEM, and who actually installed or did the commissioning? And some of those, the other rings of what's causing the downtime will emerge as that new data is built into the
Almost every reliability journey we've been on, in about year 3, they hit a wall because they haven't handled their spare parts.
Yeah, actually, one question. I know you mentioned reliability is the responsibility of everyone, but in my experience, it does feel that incentives of different engineers are different. The reliability engineer has a different incentive. The production engineer has to maximize yield production. My scheduler maximize margin while the ship is crewed. So, what is the best way that we all have a similar incentive, which I understand is like upkeep and reliability of the facility, but how does technology play in democratizing that incentive?
And we use AIM, we call it AIM, the reason the organization exists. So if you work for Disney, your job is to make a memory that lasts a lifetime. If you work for Google, your job is to organize the world's information and make it useful. So if we can key everybody to the high-level aim that our organization has, that does go some way. We do things like stakeholder analysis and SWOT. We have exercises where we take people through that actual strategy building so that they do see that connection. But they were hired, in their defense, they were hired as a specialty. They were given their measurement for success, and off they go and do that. It's just a lot of times the KPIs and the measurements are disconnected from what the aim of the organization is. So we sort of realign them to the aim of the organization. Then they realize their metrics may not be correct for what the outcome that they want. Does that make sense?
I was wondering how technology or CPAI.
Well, I think it's always highly emotional. And I think what AI is going to do for us is it's going to remove a lot of that sort of political stuff that goes on inside corporations. It's just natural for humans. There's a tribe there, there's a tribe there, it's us and them and all that. We just have to get over that. And I think AI is going to really help us get over that.
I think we're at time, so I'm sure we could keep going, and there's a ton of rich conversation to be had here. But
Let me just say 2 things to wrap it then. One is that, yes, you must master all the technical processes. Your performance is going to come from people and culture. Okay, so don't ever forget that. That's one thing I want to say. And second is, go back and don't tell anybody what reliability is. Go back and ask the people you work with, what is reliability, and listen very carefully of the spectrum of answers you're going to get across your organization. Open up to them and ask the supervisors, what is reliability? Ask the managers, what is reliability? Ask the front line, what is reliability? You're going to find there's a world of difference there. And then how do we align up those incentives so that everybody sort of has a similar language? Those are the 2 things you can do to make immediate impact.
Perfect. Thank you, Terrence. So Terrence O'Hanlon from the ReliabilityWeb. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila. So great.